Okay, good morning, design and technology. This is just an introductory video to our Monopoly board design project. Just trying to give you a basic understanding of how we're going to begin this project and to assist you with understanding the Photoshop software if you are struggling a little bit with it. Okay, so what I've done so far is I've imported the blank template design that you can find on Google Classroom into Photoshop, and we're just going to begin with that. Okay, so you will see here that we've got this blank template design, white background, black lines that identify all the different sections of the board game. So we've just got that there. And the first thing we're going to do is just make sure that our starting point, which is supposed to be the bottom right hand corner, is the same. And we're just going to do that by identifying, the layout for that section. So I'm just going to very quickly find the Monopoly board and then count from the beginning. So if this is my go, I've got a property, space, property, two spaces, and then three properties at the end with one space again. So property, space, property, yep. So if I start here from go, everything is going to be okay. So just make sure that that's the case before you start, because if you start designing in the wrong spot, you'll have a little bit of an issue there. So this is going to be our starting spot, just so that we're all clear on that. First thing we want to do is actually get rid of our background. Okay, or actually we don't have to get rid of the background, but what we're going to do is show a few different things for how we can organize this. So let's have a look at what we've got. The first thing we want to do is import the Monopoly logo into the center of our board. And we're just going to import that image and do a few basic rotations, changing shapes, etc., so that everybody's clear on that. So if I go File, Open, you should have by this point have already collected all the imagery required for your project, stored all that imagery into your database so that you can just very clearly bring pictures in. You know exactly where they're supposed to go. You're not going online, downloading them and trying to find where they're stored. You've already stored all the information you require, all the images you require, and you're just bringing them in, and it makes this process a lot faster. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is import the Monopoly logo. Which I can't find because I haven't done it properly. So I've got my Monopoly logo. When you open a new image, it's going to go on a new page. And the easiest way to take that image, if you've got no background, the easiest way to take the image is literally just to get your rectangular tool or rectangular marquee tool, and you can just select around the space that you want to take, Control C or copy, and Control V for paste. Okay, and that image is going to get imported into your design, and it's going to be a little bit smaller on your screen because it's already scaled based on the size of your design. Now, if you want to leave the Monopoly logo like that, you can. If you want to rotate it, first thing we need to also be aware of is our layers. So when we start adding layers, please make sure that you name your layers, okay? Because what's going to happen once you start having 40, 50, 60 layers, you want to start making adjustments to those layers. You're going to forget what each layer is if they're just called layer 1, layer 2, etc. So make sure that you name every layer as you import it, just so that you're going to give yourself the best chance to edit this project quickly. So I've got my Monopoly logo. I make sure I click on the layer that I want to edit first. I can go Edit, Transform, Rotate. Now I can rotate like this, do it manually, and set it up how I want. Control Z, it goes back. Or I can go to this section here where I've got the angle tool and I want to rotate it to an angle of 45 degrees. And I press OK and it sets it up for me. If you want to make your logo a little bit bigger, edit, transform, scale. You can pull it out, make it as large or as small as you want. Okay, so that's a very basic skill, just being able to cut an image from something that we've imported, rotate it, and then rescale it based on what we want. The only thing to be careful of if we're rescaling and making something larger is that if we make it too large, we can actually decrease the quality of it if it's a JPEG image like we spoke about at the end of last term. So something that you can do to make sure that the quality is still good, because from a very small distance this image still looks good. But if I go view at 100%, that is the actual print size of my logo now, and I can see that it's still a relatively high quality. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of a chance to see the quality of the print up close and personal. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're going to do there. The second thing that we're going to do is we want to clear out this background here, because we want to be able to change the color of our board to whatever we want. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to the Monopoly board and I want to erase all the white sections. Okay, I want to keep the lines. I want them to be there. I want to know what they are, but I want to erase all the white sections. Okay, so I can come down here to my eraser tool and I'm just going to click on background eraser. So what the background eraser does is it will, once you identify a specific color from the color spectrum, it is going to erase all of that background color from the layer that you've selected. So I've selected the board. If I right click on it, I can change the size of the area that I want to erase. So for example, you can see that my area is getting larger. The maximum size is 5,000 pixels. So if I was to click on the white section, you can see that it's starting to erase all the white sections within the parameters of every line. Now, I don't mind keeping the white sections for the outer bits because I'm going to use them. But if I want to change the color of this background section here or put a new box in there, I might want to do a background erase. Now, why would you do this? Because in some scenarios, let's say I wanted to add a color. The way we add color is through the paint bucket tool. I want to make sure that okay, that should be fine. Let's say I wanted to add color to my board. Over here, I've got my selection. So you can see my first selection that I might do is understand, like picking the color spectrum, going from red to purple to blue. So if I've got something in blue, I might first do that. And then if I want to adjust the color of my blue to something really specific, I could do that. Or what you can also do is, let's say you wanted to pick a particular kind of red. I could double click on this box here so that it opens this color selection palette for me. But then let's say I wanted to pick a color that was already on the board. I just take my wand off the board. It goes to this eyedropper tool, and then I can click on a particular color and it will automatically select that color for me in the color picker. So now I've got that specific color. I could bring it back across, and then if I wanted to, I could place it wherever I wanted. Okay, so it's a very easy way to select colors if you want to use the same color that's already on the board. But if you wanted to get a new color, also just select something and then import it into the design as well. Okay, so that's your color selector and that's your paint bucket tool. So far we've looked at importing an image, adjusting that image through rotations or through scaling, and then adding a picture. Now you can see that this Monopoly logo that I've got here has a border. So this is a perfect example to try the background eraser tool. Maybe you don't want that border. You want the white spaces in the middle, but you don't want the border. So you could use the background eraser tool to remove that border. Now see how it doesn't get rid of anything inside it? That's fine because it's only erasing based on that color before it hits another color. So you've got rid of that border and all of a sudden it looks a lot tidier. Now I wouldn't necessarily recommend using green as your background color, but if it was black, you've got something that's a little bit more tidy now as well. Okay, so that's some very basic skills that you can use to start editing your design. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the white. They're doing this now because I've got my Monopoly logo. Let's go back to the board. Okay, so we've reverted back to our standard now. Now, let's say you, for example, you wanted to change the colors of your lines. You don't want them to be black. You wanted them to be something a little bit different. So just for the sake of argument, we're going to use this purple here. I could go back to the paint bucket tool. I'm going to zoom in quite a lot. If I was to click on the black, you can see how it has changed that color to whatever you want now. So you can make that adjustment if you like. Okay. Always remember Control Z. If you make a mistake, do that straight away so that you can go back, revert, and make the changes you require. Okay. So once you're happy with the layout of your design or the color of it, etc., you can start playing around. Another thing that you could do even, so let's say you wanted to play around with your middle section or you wanted to give your board a particular gradient. I'm going to click on the rectangular tool. I'm going to make this rectangle the same size as the board. And if I was to go over that, it's still going to go to the same size of the board. So I've made it a purple color. Now, right now, it's like a solid color, but we can play around with that if we want as well. Okay, so we've got our color, we've got it as purple. Maybe you want the background of your Monopoly board to be completely purple, just for the sake of argument. So what I'm going to do once I've created this, is I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to move. So if I was to drag, I'm going to move my Monopoly board logo above it. I'm going to change the color of that rectangle to, or the name of that rectangle to purple background. Again, make sure that you identify everything in your layers with a name so that you don't lose anything. And if I was to go again to the background eraser tool, because I want everything to be purple, if I start erasing the white, everything now that I want is in that purple color. Okay. Now that also works if you want, for example, the outline to be purple and the inline to be white or whatever color you want, or if you wanted to do an inverse and you might want the inside of the board to be a different color from the outside of the board. So it's a very easy way to do something like that. Okay. Now, if you are happy with that, what you could also do is click on both of those layers that you've got, right click on them and merge those layers, and then that can't be changed anymore. So you've merged them, so that is now one layer. Okay, and if you were to hide it, all of it goes. Okay, so you can also do those merges if you want as well. So that's another basic skill that you could use to begin that process, and we can go from there. So let's have a look now at starting to work on like a specific element. So let's just say the first property as an example, or the first two properties. So if I was to want to work on these, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom right in because I want to focus on these two things here. And the first thing you might have to do is think about what kind of font you would want your board to have. So if I click on here, I've got my text icon or my text function. I'm just going to come here, click on the middle of it, and I'm just going to call it property 1. Then I can start playing around with the font that I would want for it. making sure that you've highlighted it first. So listen, you might want this font, you might not. This is just and as an example. And you can also play around with the color. Now I'm going to make the color white because when I go back to my board, you're going to have to pick a color for these first two properties that's the same. So let's just, for the sake of argument, stick with the pink theme, but we'll go a much lighter pink. And let's color these both in much lighter pink. So your first two properties are going to be the same color because they're the same kind of thing. Then you can organize this in the middle. You can either pull it to the middle or you can use the arrows. The arrows will allow you to incrementally find the middle of your board. So I've got property 1. I've put it in there. Now because of the text, it automatically sets up as property 1 there. Now you might want that above the Monopoly logo, so we're going to leave it like that. Now because you've got this in the correct orientation or in the middle of the board, rather than making the text again and then having to resize it perfectly, etc., what you might want to do is just duplicate it. So if I was to right click on this, I can duplicate that layer, and rather than calling it property 1 copy, I'm going to call it property 2. Press OK. Now it's called property 2, but it's still in the location of property 1. It still says property 1. So I'm just going to pull it across. If I use the guides that it decides, I can keep it in exactly the right orientation. And I'm just going to pull it across. And then if I click on the text icon, making sure I've already selected the right layer, I can just click next to one and make that adjustment. So it's exactly the same size, it's exactly the same font. No changes would need to be made. Next thing that you might do, so I'm just going to use property 1 as an example again. Let's say you wanted to use that font and put it on, a different side. You would have to make a rotation of that layer to make it suitable. So this is actually the property number 28, which is the last property. Let's say I want to duplicate this property again. Or first, before I do that, let's change the color of this property, something like a bit darker. So I'm going back to my board, making sure it's the right layer. I'm going to select that color for that section there. You could do the same thing. The last two could do the same. Now see how that's colored the whole section in. So there's what you can see when you zoom in is that there's actually a little gap up here. So what you're going to need to do for any scenarios where that happens, is if I get the rectangular tool, I'm going to make it as black as possible, and I just create a little rectangle here that I move so that it fills up that hole. What I can do with that rectangle, like I showed you before, is select the rectangle and the Monopoly board, right click them, merge those layers, and now I've filled that in. So if I was to go back, let's first select that color I need, which was this one, using the color picker, and I go back and color that in. Now you don't have that same problem. So that might happen a few times. You just have to work with that. But going back to property 1, I want to use this as my base. I'm going to do another duplicate. We're going to call it property 28. And what I'm going to do before I move it is I'm going to rotate. So I'm going to go edit, transform, rotate. Now let's go 45. No, let's go 90. So it actually rotates it the wrong way. I need the font to be facing inwards. So I'm just going to go minus 90. I can move it. Well, let's select it first, make sure it's what we want. Select the moving tool, and I can place that in there. Again, text, select it, delete 28. Now I've used that tool. I see how it's a little bit too big. In this scenario, you might have to go edit, transform, or free transform, and you might decide to just pull it in a little bit. So you can play around with that. Only a small adjustment, so it shouldn't necessarily be a problem. So there I've got property 28, and you could do property 27. If you wanted to put the logo or that text on the other side or on the top, you would just rotate it accordingly again. So in this scenario here, it's going to be minus 90 on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, the rotation is going to be 90 degrees. And then on the top, it's obviously going to be 180 degrees to flip it. So just make sure you get them right. You want the property to be facing inwards from the board, and you're just making sure that you're always duplicating the layer that you've already created so that they are all as closely kind of formatted as possible. So you might do that first, go through, color all the different sections that you want. You could refer back to the board. So the first, for example, two colors, or the first two properties are the same color, then we've got 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 2. So you'll just follow that same pattern, put the colors in that you wanted for each of those properties, and then obviously the names. I've called it property 1, but you're going to have names for all of those properties that you've already identified in your list on Google Classroom. So on your Google Classroom, you've already gone through your Monopoly adjustment task. You've picked an idea based on these two here. You've hopefully named all 28 properties already, and you're using those names 1 to 28 and filling them in on your board. Okay, so that's a very basic introduction to that. The last thing we want to look at is adding some imagery to a property. Okay, so let's say in my examples, I've got kind of that Formula One theme that we looked at before. We're just going to use that again now. So let's just go File, Open. So I was using tracks as my property. So I'm just going to use that again. So I've already identified, you can see all the different tracks that were required. Image 1, let's open that. So this was my first design. Now, all I want from this, and you can actually do this as well, there's a few ways that we can select what we want from an image. If it's something as simple as that, we can use the background eraser tool like we've done before, and I can get rid of that really dark black so that I'm left with kind of this white section that I want of the track layout. It's one thing that you could do. You could also get the selection tool, or the magic wand tool. So let's say I wanted only the white. If I click on the white, it just selects all that white. If I hold down Shift, it takes that black on the inside that I would want as well. And you can continue adding based on the magic wand tool. Okay, so whatever you want to select, it will select. Okay, so you can use the background eraser tool. If the background eraser tool, this is a little bit more time consuming, you could use the normal eraser tool. Now what that will mean you will need to do is you would need to manually erase parts of an image. So for example, let's say you wanted to just have the outline, the white outline of this track that you wanted to use, and you couldn't use anything else. You would manually go around and shave off everything that you didn't want, taking your time, trying to do it as accurately as possible. And then once you'd done all of that, you could then again use the marquee tool, select what you wanted to take and put it into the other image. So you've got the eraser tool and the background eraser tool and the magic wand tool that you could use. And there's also this quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool sometimes is a little bit finicky, but let's say you wanted to take that part there. You could then hold down Shift and keep, adding to that selection. Okay. Now, obviously, it has a mind of its own, so you'd need to be considerate of what it does or what it does select, because sometimes it's not going to be what you want, and then you'd have to use either the background eraser tool, the eraser tool, or the magic wand. So all these different options kind of are dictated by how high quality your image is, and then what it starts selecting. Okay, but you've got something like that. So I don't need the eraser tool, so I'm just going to use a quick selection tool like I had before. You could even use this as well. So the lasso actually just allows you to draw. So you wanted to draw a line around something and a particular part of the image. And what it will do is it will try to, as best it can, just take what you want. So you'd have to be as accurate as possible with that as well. But I'm lucky. I can just use the magic wand tool. I just want this white section. Control X, so it cuts it out of that last image. Obviously, right now you wouldn't see a whole lot because the board is white. So what I'm going to do is actually just color this rectangle in a bit first. So I've got my, let's just make it black for the sake of this activity. I'm just going to make this section here black, just so that I can place my logo. The logo places wherever it wants. Just drag it across. So that's my property there. Then we're going to zoom in. Now, if you've got something as simple as a shape for your property, you can change the colors of it if you want to. I could very easily just make it yellow. Click the wand tool. So I've got layer 1. First thing I want to do, property 1 image. And what I'm also going to do is drag that next to property 1. So I'm putting all the property 1 stuff together. I select that, make sure I'm on that, and then I can paint it a different color. Now you can see that it hasn't colored as yellow. So that's a bit of a problem, but the reason for that is because it's either got a background or it's in black and gray. So let's see what removing the background does. It's not what I want. So you might have to play around with the blending options to get the color that you would want for this. And we'll go that in a bit more detail down the line. So you can play around with that. Make it the size that you want. And then obviously, because it's a Monopoly game, also use the guide. See how you've got the guides to line it up in the middle of your shape? You can use them as well. And obviously the last thing you have to do for each property is, again, use the text to put your price in for whatever that's going to be. So again, the same way that we did for our properties, place it in the middle and then continue to duplicate that for all of your properties as you go forward. And you can see that property 1, image 1, and the price are all done. Now, once you complete all of those properties and they're all got their separate layers, I wouldn't recommend doing this till the end. To simplify your layers, you might click all of those, right click, and merge them. So once you merge, you can't edit them independently anymore, so make sure you're completely done before you do that merge, but that might be what you do at the end, just so that you start minimizing the amount of properties. If you look at what we've done already, we haven't done a whole lot to our board, but we've already started to accumulate quite a lot of layers.